What if I told you that in the mysterious waters of the Bermuda Triangle, there are ships still sailing that vanished decades ago? Phantom vessels moving through time itself, their crews unaware that the world has changed around them. Ghost ships that appear on radar, respond to radio calls, and then vanish back into the temporal mists of the Devil's Triangle. Tonight, as the world grows quiet and your mind prepares for rest, we'll sail into the most enigmatic waters on Earth. We'll encounter vessels that exist between dimensions, meet sailors who have been sailing the same route for 70 years, and discover that the Bermuda Triangle isn't just a place where ships disappear. It's where they continue their eternal voyages through corridors of time that shouldn't exist. Prepare to board these phantom ships and sail through mysteries that challenge everything we know about time, space, and the ocean's deepest secrets. Before we set sail into these mysterious waters, where time itself bends and reality becomes fluid, if you find comfort in these maritime mysteries and enjoy drifting off to sleep while exploring the unknown, consider joining our crew of fellow ocean explorers. Subscribe and ring that notification bell to sail with us as we navigate the most mysterious waters on Earth and discover the secrets that have been hidden in the mists for generations. Now, lower the lights, settle into your berth, and prepare to sail into the Bermuda Triangle, where phantom ships continue their eternal voyages. The discovery began on a calm Tuesday morning in March 2024, when Coast Guard Station Miami Beach picked up an unusual radar signature approximately 180 nautical miles northeast of their position, right in the heart of the Bermuda Triangle. Petty Officer Sarah Chen was monitoring the radar screens during the U-600 watch when she noticed something that made her check her instruments. A large vessel was moving steadily northwest at approximately 12 knots. But there was something wrong with the signature. The radar return was too clean, too perfect. Chen later reported in her official log, "Modern ships have complex radar signatures, multiple returns from different parts of the superstructure, interference patterns from electronics. This ship showed up as a single, solid blip, like something from 50 years ago." When Chen attempted to hail the vessel on standard maritime frequencies, she received a response that sent chills through the Coast Guard station. Coast Guard, this is the SS Marine Sulphur Queen, Captain VN, Fanning commanding, bound for Norfolk with a cargo of molten sulfur. Our position is 25 Gregs Wen, 76 Grady W. Requesting weather information for our route north. The watch supervisor, Chief Petty Officer Martinez, immediately recognized the ship's name from maritime history files. The SS Marine Sulphur Queen had vanished without a trace in February 1963, somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle, with all 39 souls aboard. "This is Coast Guard Station Miami Beach." Martinez responded carefully. "Can you confirm your vessel's registration and last port of call?" The response came back in a voice that sounded as clear and normal as any modern radio transmission. "Coast Guard, our last port was Beaumont, Texas. We departed February 2nd with 260 tons of molten sulfur. Everything proceeding normally. Weather looks good for the crossing." Martinez felt his hands trembling as he realized the implications. According to the ship's radio operator, they had departed Beaumont on February 2nd, but they were speaking as if it was still 1963. The Marine Sulphur Queen had been sailing the same route for over 60 years apparently unaware that decades had passed. "Sir, can you tell me what year you believe it to be?" Martinez asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. 1963, of course. February 4th, 1963. Is there some problem with our radio? You sound different from the Coast Guard operators we usually talk to. The radar contact continued moving northwest for another 47 minutes, maintaining course and speed. The Coast Guard dispatched a helicopter to investigate, but when the aircraft reached the coordinates, they found empty ocean. The radar signature had vanished, and no trace of the marine sulfur queen could be found. But this was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, Coast Guard stations throughout the region began reporting similar contacts. Ships that had vanished in the Bermuda Triangle years, or even decades ago, were appearing on radar, responding to radio calls, and then disappearing back into whatever temporal dimension they had been sailing. The USS Cyclops, a massive naval cargo ship that vanished in 1918 with 3 to 6 men aboard, was spotted by multiple radar stations moving at its characteristic slow speed, heavily loaded with manganese ore. Radio contact revealed a crew that believed they were still en route to Baltimore, completely unaware that World War I had ended, let alone that over a century had passed. "This is the USS Cyclops, Naval Auxiliary Service," came the formal response when contacted. "We are proceeding to Baltimore with strategic cargo. Our estimated arrival is March 13th, 1918. We require updated weather information for the coastal approach." Even more disturbing was the contact with Flight 19, the famous squadron of 5 Navy torpedo bombers that had vanished in 1945 during a training flight. Air traffic controllers at Fort Lauderdale picked up radio transmissions on the old military frequencies. "Fort Lauderdale Tower, this is Flight 19. We seem to be off course. Everything looks wrong. We can't make out where we are. Everything looks strange, even the ocean. We think we may be about 225 miles northeast of base." The same words that had been the last communication from Flight 19 in 1945 were being repeated, exactly as they had been recorded in the official files. But this time, radar showed 5 aircraft moving in formation, circling endlessly in the same pattern they had been flying when they vanished nearly 80 years ago. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a temporal physicist from the University of Miami, was brought in to consult on these impossible contacts. Her initial analysis suggested something that challenged the fundamental understanding of how time and space functioned. We're not dealing with ghosts or supernatural phenomena, Dr. Rodriguez explained to the assembled Coast Guard commanders. We're seeing evidence of temporal displacement. These vessels appear to be trapped in closed time loops, repeating the same voyage over and over, completely unaware that time is passing in the outside world. As reports continued to pour in from throughout the Triangle region, it became clear that the phenomenon was much larger than anyone had initially imagined. Dozens of ships and aircraft that had vanished over the past century were still sailing or flying their original routes, trapped in temporal bubbles that kept them locked in the moment of their disappearance. The breakthrough in understanding the phantom vessels came when Dr. Rodriguez and a joint Coast Guard Navy task force managed to establish prolonged communication with the crew of the MV Joyita, a merchant vessel that had vanished in 1955 while traveling between Samoa and the Tokalo Islands. Unlike the brief contacts with other ghost ships, the Voyager's crew seemed able to maintain radio communication for extended periods, allowing the researchers to conduct detailed interviews with people who had been sailing for nearly 70 years, but had experienced only days of subjective time. The strange thing is, they remember us. Dr. Rodriguez noted in her research logs. Captain Chuck Simpson of the Voyager recalls our previous conversations, even though from our perspective, they're separated by weeks. But from his perspective, we talked just hours ago. Through these extended communications, the research team learned that the crews of the Phantom vessels were experiencing time in a completely different way than the outside world. What seemed like decades to external observers was experienced as continuous voyages, lasting only days or weeks to those aboard the trapped ships. We've been sailing for about 6 days now, Captain Simpson reported during one communication session. Weather's been strange, lots of fog, and the stars don't look right. But we're making good progress toward the Toklos. Should be there soon. The Voyager had been making the same progress toward the Toklos for nearly 70 years. But to Captain Simpson and his crew, they were experiencing a single, continuous voyage through increasingly strange weather and temporal anomalies. Even more remarkable was the discovery that some crews had begun to notice that something was wrong. The captain of the SS Poet, a cargo ship that vanished in 1980, had started keeping detailed logs of the strange phenomena he was observing. October 27th, 1980, day 18 of what should have been a 12-day voyage. Captain Edgar read from his log during a radio transmission. The sun seems to be moving wrong in the sky. We've passed the same iceberg 4 times, but we're sailing in the Caribbean. The radio keeps picking up broadcasts from stations that don't exist, playing music I've never heard. Captain Edgar had been documenting temporal anomalies for what he believed was 18 days, but which had actually been over 40 years. His logs revealed a growing awareness that his ship was caught in something beyond normal maritime experience. The research team made another startling discovery when they established contact with the crew of a yacht called Witchcraft, which had vanished in 1967 during a short cruise near Miami. The boat's owner, Dan Barak, reported that he could sometimes see other ships that didn't look right. There's a big Navy ship about 2 miles off our starboard bow, Barak reported during one communication. Looks like something from World War I-4 smokestacks, lots of guns. They don't respond to our signals, but they're definitely there. And there's what looks like some kind of flying boats circling overhead. Barak was describing encounters with other Phantom vessels. He was seeing the USS Cyclops and Flight 19 from his position in the temporal anomaly. The ghost ships were not only trapped in time loops, but they were occasionally able to perceive each other across the temporal barriers. Dr. Rodriguez realized they were dealing with what she termed temporal clustering, multiple time displacement events that had created overlapping bubbles of distorted spacetime in the Bermuda Triangle region. It's as if the area acts as a temporal trap. She explained to the research team. Vessels enter certain coordinates under specific conditions, and instead of simply vanishing, they become trapped in recursive time loops. They continue their voyages in a parallel temporal dimension that occasionally intersects with our normal timeline. The most disturbing revelation came from the crew of Flight 19. During one extended radio contact, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, the flight leader, described seeing things that shouldn't exist in 1945. "Tower, we're seeing ships down there that look like something from the future. Big metal things with no sails, no smokestacks. And there are lights in the sky, not stars, but moving lights in formation. This whole area is wrong. Everything is wrong." Lieutenant Taylor was seeing modern ships and aircraft from his position in the temporal anomaly. The phantom flights were experiencing temporal bleeding, where they could sometimes perceive other time periods, overlapping their own. Through careful analysis of these communications, Dr. Rodriguez and her team began to map the temporal geography of the Bermuda Triangle. They discovered that the area contained multiple time zones, regions where different temporal periods intersected and overlapped. Ships and aircraft that entered these zones under certain conditions became trapped in temporal loops, doomed to repeat their final voyages endlessly, while occasionally glimpsing other time periods through the temporal barriers. But perhaps most mysteriously, some of the phantom crews reported seeing things that hadn't happened yet. Ships and aircraft that appeared to be from the future, suggesting that the temporal anomalies didn't just trap vessels from the past, but created windows into times that were yet to come. As the research into the phantom vessels intensified, Dr. Rodriguez assembled a team of specialists that included quantum physicists, maritime historians, and advanced radar technicians. Their mission was unprecedented: to create the first map of temporal anomalies in the Bermuda Triangle. The team established monitoring stations at key points around the triangle, equipped with experimental sensors designed to detect temporal distortions. What they discovered challenged everything science understood about the nature of time and space. "We're detecting at least 17 distinct temporal zones within the triangle," reported Dr. James Chen, the project's quantum physicist. "Each zone appears to be operating on a different temporal frequency, like radio stations broadcasting on different wavelengths. The temporal zones weren't random. They followed specific patterns related to ocean currents, magnetic field variations, and what appeared to be geological structures on the ocean floor. Some zones were stable, maintaining consistent temporal displacement for decades. Others were highly volatile, shifting between different time periods unpredictably. The most stable zone, designated Temporal Zone Alpha, appeared to be centered around the coordinates where the marine sulfur queen had first vanished. This zone consistently showed temporal displacement of approximately 61 years, creating a pocket where 1963 continued to exist alongside the present day. Zone Alpha is like a temporal fossil, Dr. Rodriguez explained. It's preserving a specific moment in time, February 4th, 1963, and anything that enters this zone becomes trapped in that temporal framework. Temporal Zone Beta, located near the coordinates where Flight 19 had vanished, was more complex. It appeared to contain multiple overlapping time periods, creating a temporal maze where different eras intersected and overlapped. In Zone Beta, we're detecting temporal signatures from 1945, 1963, 1980, and at least 4 other time periods. Dr. Chen reported, "It's as if multiple temporal displacement events have occurred in the same location, creating layers of distorted time. The research team made their most significant discovery when they detected what they termed temporal bleeding. Moments when the barriers between different time zones became permeable, allowing vessels from different eras to interact with each other. During one such bleeding event, the team recorded a remarkable radio conversation between the crew of the USS Cyclops from 1918 and the captain of a modern cargo ship that had entered the Triangle in 2019. Unknown vessel, this is Captain Williams of the MV Atlantic Crossing. Are you in distress? Your ship's configuration is unfamiliar. This is Lieutenant Commander Worley of the USS Cyclops. We are proceeding normally to Baltimore. Your vessel. I don't recognize your type. What nation's flag do you fly? American flag, sir. What's your estimated date of arrival in Baltimore? March 13th, 1918, God willing. What year do you make it to be, Captain? Sir, it's 2019, March 15th, 2019. The conversation continued for 17 minutes before both ships faded from radar, returning to their respective temporal zones. But during those 17 minutes, two vessels separated by over a century had sailed side by side in the same waters. The Temporal Cartography project revealed that the Bermuda Triangle contained what Dr. Rodriguez termed temporal archaeology, layers of different time periods, stacked on top of each other like geological strata. We're not just dealing with ships that are lost in time, she realized. We're looking at a region where time itself has become stratified. Past, present, and possibly future are all existing simultaneously in different layers. The team discovered that certain environmental conditions triggered temporal bleeding events. Specific combinations of atmospheric pressure, magnetic field fluctuations, and solar activity could cause the barriers between temporal zones to become permeable. During these events, phantom vessels from different eras could perceive and interact with each other. The crews would report seeing ships and aircraft that didn't belong, and radio operators would pick up transmissions from multiple time periods simultaneously. It's like temporal archaeology in reverse, Dr. Chen observed. Instead of digging down through layers of time, we're seeing all the layers exposed simultaneously. The research team also discovered that the temporal zones were not static. They moved slowly across the triangle region, following patterns that seemed to be influenced by ocean currents, tidal forces, and lunar cycles. The temporal geography is dynamic, Dr. Rodriguez reported. These zones drift like weather patterns, which explains why the Bermuda Triangle phenomena are so unpredictable. A ship might enter coordinates that are completely normal one day, but encounter a temporal anomaly the next. Perhaps most mysteriously, the team detected temporal zones that appeared to be connected to future time periods. These forward zones occasionally produced radar signatures and radio transmissions that seemed to come from ships and aircraft that wouldn't exist for decades. We're picking up transmissions from vessels using technology that doesn't exist yet, Dr. Chen reported during one monitoring session. Communication systems, navigation equipment, even propulsion signatures that are beyond our current capabilities. The implications were staggering. The Bermuda Triangle wasn't just a trap for vessels from the past. It was a window into the future, where ships and aircraft from coming decades were also becoming caught in temporal loops. As the team continued their temporal cartography work, they began to realize that They weren't just studying a localized anomaly. The Bermuda Triangle appeared to be connected to a much larger network of temporal distortions that spanned the globe, all somehow linked by quantum forces that science was only beginning to understand. The most poignant aspect of the phantom vessel phenomenon was revealed through extended communications with the passengers and crews who had been trapped in temporal loops for decades. Their stories provided intimate glimpses into what it meant to exist in suspended time, forever sailing toward destinations they would never reach. Mrs. Dorothy Williams, a passenger aboard the luxury yacht Oceanic when it vanished in 1958, had been on what she thought was a 3-day pleasure cruise from Miami to Nassau for 66 years. During radio communications, she described her experience with a mixture of confusion and growing unease. "The weather has been most peculiar," Mrs. Williams reported during one extended conversation with the research team. "We've been sailing for what feels like a week now, but Captain Henderson assures us we should reach Nassau soon. The strangest thing is the sunsets. They seem to last for hours, and the stars appear to be in the wrong positions." And Mrs. Williams and the other passengers aboard the Oceanic had been experiencing the same week-long cruise since 1958, with each day blending seamlessly into the next in an eternal voyage through temporal mists. Even more heartbreaking were the communications with family members aboard the MV Salem, a cargo ship that had vanished in 1980, with several crew members, wives, and children aboard for what was supposed to be a short family cruise. "Daddy, when are we going to see the dolphins?" asked 7-year-old Katie Morrison during one radio transmission. "You said we'd see dolphins, but all I see is fog and strange lights in the water." Kukiti had been 7 years old for over 40 years, trapped in the innocent wonder of childhood while sailing through temporal anomalies that her young mind couldn't comprehend. Her father, Chief Engineer Tom Morrison, had begun to suspect that something was wrong with their voyage. "The engines are running fine, but we don't seem to be making progress," Tom reported to the research team. "The GPS keeps showing impossible readings, and the radio picks up broadcasts in languages I don't recognize, music that sounds different. My little girl keeps asking when we'll get home, and I don't know what to tell her." The research team learned that the psychological impact of temporal displacement varied greatly among the phantom vessel occupants. Some, like Mrs. Williams, retained their normal perception of time passing, but noticed increasing anomalies in their environment. Others, particularly children, seemed to exist in a state of temporal suspension where their consciousness remained exactly as it had been at the moment of displacement. Dr. Sarah Park, a psychologist brought in to study the mental health aspects of temporal displacement, made disturbing discoveries about the long-term effects on the trapped individuals. Those who retain awareness of time's passage are beginning to show signs of temporal dissociation, Dr. Park reported. They're becoming aware that something is fundamentally wrong with their reality, but they can't quite grasp what it is. It's like being in a dream where you know you're dreaming, but can't wake up. The crew of the fishing vessel El Dorado, which had vanished in 1975, provided some of the most detailed accounts of life in temporal suspension. Captain Roberto Santos had maintained detailed logs throughout what he believed was an extended fishing trip. Day 23 of what should have been a 5-day trip. Captain Santos read from his log during one radio session. The fish we're catching are species I don't recognize. They seem to glow with their own light. The water itself looks different. Sometimes it's the normal blue, green of the Caribbean. Sometimes it turns silver like liquid mercury. Captain Santos described fishing in waters that existed across multiple time periods simultaneously. His nets would sometimes bring up fish that had been extinct for millions of years, and other times would catch specimens that appeared to be evolutionary adaptations to future ocean conditions. We caught something yesterday that looked like a cross between a tuna and something mechanical, he reported. It had what looked like circuits running through its flesh, but it was definitely alive. The men are getting spooked. The research team realized that the phantom vessels weren't just sailing through temporal anomalies. They were sailing through evolutionary time, encountering life forms from different periods of Earth's development. Perhaps the most disturbing communications came from the passengers of Pan Am Flight 914, a commercial aircraft that had allegedly vanished in 1955 and was reportedly contacted by air traffic controllers decades later. This is Captain Dan Wilson of Pan Am Flight 914, came the transmission during one contact session. We're experiencing some unusual weather conditions. Passengers are asking about the delay, but I'm not sure how to explain what we're seeing outside the aircraft. Or flight attendant Margaret Thompson provided chilling details about the passengers' experience. The passengers think we've been in flight for about 6 hours, but everyone's watches have stopped. The strangest thing is looking out the windows. Sometimes we see normal clouds and ocean, but other times we see things that can't be real. Ships that look like they're from different centuries. Lights in formations that move like they're alive. The aircraft had been experiencing the same 6-hour flight for nearly 70 years, with the passengers completely unaware of the passage of time. To them, they were simply experiencing a delayed flight with unusual weather conditions. Dr. Park's psychological evaluations revealed that the temporal displacement had created a form of collective dissociation among the phantom vessel occupants. They existed in a shared reality that was increasingly disconnected from normal temporal flow. They're creating their own psychological defense mechanisms to cope with the temporal anomalies, Dr. Park explained. Rather than accepting that they're trapped in time loops, their minds are reinterpreting the anomalies as unusual but explainable events, bad weather, equipment malfunctions, or navigation errors. The most heartbreaking aspect of the phenomenon was the growing realization among some of the trapped individuals that they might never reach their destinations. During one extended communication with the crew of the luxury yacht Witchcraft, owner Dan Barak expressed fears that many of the phantom vessel occupants were beginning to suspect. "We were just going out for a short evening cruise," Barak said, his voice heavy with a sadness that had been building for over 50 years. "My friend and I wanted to see the Christmas lights along the Miami coast. That was December 22nd, 1967. We should have been back in an hour. But the lights keep moving, the coastline keeps changing, and I'm starting to think we might never get home." The research team realized they weren't just studying a scientific phenomenon. They were witnessing the human cost of temporal displacement, the profound tragedy of lives suspended between moments, forever sailing toward home ports they would never reach. One of the most fascinating aspects of the phantom vessel phenomenon was how the displacement affected navigation instruments and the crew's attempts to determine their position. The research team discovered that the temporal anomalies created what they termed navigational paradoxes, situations where different instruments gave contradictory readings, all of which were simultaneously correct. Captain Maria Santos of the research vessel Temporal Explorer was the first to document these paradoxes when her ship briefly entered the edge of temporal zone beta during a monitoring mission. "All our instruments are giving different readings," she reported during the incident. "GPS shows we're at 25.5 WN, 79.2 W. The magnetic compass puts us 50 miles northeast of that position. The celestial navigation readings suggest we're somewhere near the Bahamas in 1963. And the sonar is showing an ocean depth that doesn't match any of our charts." For 17 minutes, the Temporal Explorer existed simultaneously in multiple time periods, with each navigation system accessing different temporal layers of the same geographic location. The phantom vessels provided even more dramatic examples of navigational paradox. The crew of the SS Marine Sulphur Queen had been navigating using 1963 technology for over 60 years, but their instruments continued to provide readings that were accurate for their temporal zone. "Our position is 25 Theories Endry 13. N. 76 Breeze 09 W. Captain Fanning of the Marine Sulphur Queen reported during one communication session. "Compass bearing steady on DOU 45 GRE. Speed 12 knots. Weather is clear, visibility unlimited. All instruments reading normal." But when the research team checked those coordinates in the present day, they found empty ocean. The Marine Sulphur Queen was navigating through a version of the Atlantic that existed in 1963, complete with different ocean currents, weather patterns, and even marine life. Dr. Chen's analysis revealed that the temporal zones preserved not just the vessels and their crews, but entire environmental conditions from their time periods. The Marine Sulphur Queen isn't just trapped in 1963 temporally, he explained. They're sailing through the actual ocean conditions that existed in 1963. Different water temperatures, different current patterns, even different positions of the continental shelves. This environmental preservation explained why the phantom vessels' instruments continued to function normally. They weren't malfunctioning, they were accurately reading the conditions of their preserved time periods. The research team made another startling discovery when they analyzed the navigation logs of Flight 19. Written off from French Guiana, Taylor's famous last transmissions about being unable to determine their position took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of temporal displacement. "We can't be sure of any direction," Lieutenant Taylor had radioed in 1945. "Everything is wrong. Everything looks strange, even the ocean. We can't be sure of where we are." The research team realized that Flight 19 had been experiencing navigational paradox at the moment of their displacement. Their instruments were reading conditions from multiple time periods simultaneously, creating the confusion that led to their final, desperate transmissions. Flight 19 wasn't lost because of navigation failure, Dr. Rodriguez concluded. They were lost because they flew into a region where navigation itself had become impossible due to temporal interference. The Phantom vessels provided detailed accounts of what it was like to navigate in temporally distorted space. Captain Chuck Simpson of the MV Voyager described the experience during one extended communications. "The stars are all wrong," he reported. "Polaris isn't where it should be, and I'm seeing constellations that don't belong in these waters. The sun rises and sets at angles that don't match our heading. My chronometer keeps running, but time doesn't seem to be passing normally." Captain Simpson was experiencing stellar navigation through temporal distortion. The stars he was seeing were from different time periods, creating navigation readings that were accurate for various temporal zones, but contradictory when viewed from any single time period. Even more disturbing were reports from the crew of the USS Cyclops, whose naval training had included advanced navigation techniques. Lieutenant Commander Worley described navigational anomalies that defied explanation. "Our dead reckoning puts us on course for Baltimore, but the celestial readings suggest we're sailing in circles," he reported. "The magnetic compass spins freely, as if the magnetic poles have disappeared. Yet our gyrocompass remains steady. The ocean depth readings show we're sailing over the Puerto Rico Trench, but our charts show we should be in shallow coastal waters." The USS Cyclops was experiencing navigation through what the research team termed temporal geology, sailing over ocean floor features from different geological periods simultaneously. Dr. Rodriguez's team discovered that the navigational paradoxes weren't random. They followed specific patterns related to the temporal zone boundaries and the degree of temporal distortion in each area. Ships entering areas of mild temporal distortion experience small navigational anomalies, compass variations, unusual star positions, slightly wrong GPS readings, she explained. But vessels caught in severe temporal displacement zones experience complete navigational paradox, where every instrument gives readings from different time periods. The research team also documented cases where Phantom vessel crews had learned to navigate using the temporal anomalies themselves. Captain Edgar of the SS Poet had developed what he called temporal navigation techniques. "I've learned to read the anomalies," he reported during one communication. "When the sun angle doesn't match the compass heading, I know we're passing through a temporal shear. When the sonar shows impossible depths, I adjust course to follow the true depth readings. It's like sailing through a maze where the walls keep moving." Captain Edgar had been unconsciously developing navigation techniques that accounted for temporal displacement, learning to read the signs of temporal zone boundaries and navigate between different periods of time. The most remarkable discovery came when the research team realized that some Phantom vessels had been using temporal navigation to communicate with each other across time zones. Ships from different eras had learned to position themselves at temporal zone boundaries where they could interact with vessels from other time periods. "They're creating a temporal communication network," Dr. Chen observed. "Ships trapped in different time periods are using the zone boundaries as meeting points where they can share information and provide mutual support." The Phantom vessels had unwittingly created their own temporal civilization, complete with navigation techniques, communication protocols, and social structures adapted to existence in displaced time. They were no longer just lost ships. They had become temporal mariners, sailing through the fourth dimension itself, the most direct window into the world of the phantom vessels, came through radio communications. The research team discovered that radio waves seemed to penetrate temporal boundaries more easily than other forms of electromagnetic radiation, allowing for extended conversations with crews who had been displaced across decades of time. Chief Radio Operator Mike Sullivan of the Coast Guard Monitoring Station became the primary communicator with the phantom vessels. His conversations with crews from different eras provided unprecedented insights into life in temporal displacement. The hardest part is trying to explain current technology to people from the 1940s and 50s. Sullivan noted in his logs, "When I mention GPS or satellite communication, they think I'm talking about science fiction. But when they describe the phenomena they're experiencing, they're giving me information that our most advanced physics can barely explain." One of the most poignant communication sessions occurred with the radio operator of the MV Joyita, a young man named Tommy Rodriguez who had been 23 years old when the ship vanished in 1955. "Coast Guard. This is Tommy on the Joyita," came the familiar voice that Sullivan had grown to know over months of conversations. "I've been thinking about what you told me about the year being 2024. If that's true, then I should be. Let me see. I'd be 92 years old now, but I still feel 23. I still look 23. How is that possible?" Tommy had begun to grasp the reality of his temporal displacement, but his young mind struggled to comprehend the implications. He had been 23 years old for nearly 70 years, trapped in the physical and mental state he had been in at the moment of displacement. "Sometimes I think I remember things that haven't happened yet," Tommy continued during one session. "Dreams about talking to people who won't be born for decades, seeing machines that don't exist. Do you think the time displacement affects our dreams too?" Rodriguez's analysis of these communications revealed that temporal displacement had indeed affected the dream states of the phantom vessel occupants. Many reported dreams that seemed to show them events from future time periods, suggesting that consciousness itself might be experiencing temporal bleeding. The radio communications also revealed the development of unique social structures among the phantom vessels. Ships from different eras had established regular communication schedules, creating a temporal community spanning multiple decades. This is Captain Henderson of the Oceanic. Calling the morning network came one transmission that Sullivan recorded during a routine monitoring session. "Marine Sulfur Queen. Are you on frequency? Cyclops, can you read me? Joyita, what's your position today?" The phantom vessels had created their own radio network, with ships from 1918, 1955, 1963, and other years maintaining regular contact with each other. They shared navigation information, weather observations, and increasingly, philosophical discussions about their temporal situation. During one remarkable session, Sullivan listened in on a conversation between Captain Worley of the 1918 USS Cyclops and Captain Edgar of the 1980 SS Poet, two men separated by over 60 years of real time, but sailing in the same temporal waters. "Captain Edgar, your ship's technology is fascinating," Captain Worley observed. "These radio telephones you describe, machines that can calculate navigation automatically. It sounds like something from Mr. Verne's novels." "Captain Worley, your ship represents an era I only read about in history books." Captain Edgar replied, "But here we are, sailing the same impossible waters. I'm starting to think that time isn't as fixed as we thought it was." The conversations between Phantom vessel crews from different eras provided unique perspectives on technological and social development. Officers from World War I were learning about modern navigation from captains who had vanished in the 1980s, while modern crews were gaining insights into seamanship techniques that had been lost to time. But perhaps the most disturbing communications came from crews who had begun to encounter vessels that appeared to be from the future. Captain Santos of the El Dorado reported radio contact with ships using technology that didn't exist in the present day. Coast Guard, we're receiving transmissions from a vessel calling itself the Quantum Navigator. Captain Santos reported during one session. They're using communication equipment that I can't understand. Their voices are clear, but they're talking about navigation systems that use something called temporal positioning and dimensional coordinates. The research team realized that the Bermuda Triangle's temporal anomalies weren't just trapping vessels from the past, they were also creating windows into future time periods. Ships and aircraft from decades that hadn't yet occurred were apparently becoming displaced into the same temporal maze. Dr. Chen's analysis of these future communications revealed technology concepts that were decades ahead of current scientific understanding. The Quantum Navigator described propulsion systems based on space, time manipulation and communication networks that operated across multiple dimensions. We're not just studying temporal displacement, Dr. Chen realized. We're getting a preview of future maritime technology from vessels that won't be built for decades. The radio communications also revealed that some Phantom vessel crews had developed what could only be described as temporal philosophy, when ways of understanding existence, when normal concepts of time no longer applied. I've been thinking about what it means to exist. Tommy Rodriguez of the Joy to mused during one late night communication session. If I've been 23 for 70 years, am I still the same person I was when this started? Or have I become something else, something that exists outside of normal time? These philosophical discussions between displaced crews provided insights into human consciousness under conditions that had never been experienced before. The Phantom vessel occupants were inadvertently conducting experiments in temporal psychology, discovering how human awareness adapted to existence in displaced time. As the months of communication continued, Sullivan noticed that the Phantom vessel crews were beginning to influence each other across time periods. Ideas and concepts shared between ships from different eras were creating a unique temporal culture that blended elements from multiple decades. They're not just lost ships anymore, Sullivan observed. They're becoming a temporal civilization with their own customs, their own understanding of reality, and their own solutions to problems that exist nowhere else in human experience. The radio voices from the Phantom vessels had become more than just communications from the past. They were transmissions from a parallel world where time itself had become navigable, and where human consciousness was learning to exist in ways that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality. The most extraordinary discovery in the phantom vessel phenomenon came from an unexpected source: reports of a lighthouse that appeared to be broadcasting warnings to ships across multiple time periods simultaneously. The first report came from Captain Simpson of the MV Joyita, who described seeing a lighthouse that didn't appear on any of his 1955 charts. "There's a lighthouse about 5 miles off our starboard bow," Captain Simpson reported during one communication session. "Strange thing is, it's not on our charts, and the light pattern isn't anything I recognize. It's flashing in sequences. 3 long, 2 short, 3 long again. Almost like it's trying to communicate." When the research team investigated the coordinates Captain Simpson provided, they found empty ocean, but radar occasionally detected a large, solid structure at that location, a structure that appeared and disappeared in sync with reports from various phantom vessels. The lighthouse sightings were reported by ships from multiple time periods: the USS Cyclops from 1918, the Marine Sulphur Queen from 1963, and the SS Poet from 1980, all described seeing the same lighthouse, though their descriptions varied slightly based on their temporal perspectives. "It's a fine modern lighthouse," Captain Worley of the Cyclops reported. "Steel construction, electric beacon, more advanced than most coastal installations I've seen. But the light pattern is peculiar, and there seems to be some kind of radio transmission coming from it." Captain Edgar of the SS Poet provided a different perspective. "The lighthouse looks old-fashioned to me, like something from the early 1900s. But it's equipped with radio equipment that's more advanced than anything I've seen. The beacon seems to be broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously." Each phantom vessel crew was seeing the lighthouse as it appeared from their temporal perspective, but all were receiving the same mysterious transmissions. The research team realized they were dealing with a temporal lighthouse, a beacon that existed across multiple time periods simultaneously. Dr. Rodriguez's analysis revealed that the lighthouse transmissions contain navigation warnings, specifically tailored to each time period. Ships from 1918 received warnings in maritime code appropriate to that era, while vessels from the 1980s received modern radio navigation alerts. "The lighthouse isn't just broadcasting across time," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "It's adapting its transmissions to match the technology and understanding of each era. It's like having a universal translator for temporal communication." The breakthrough came when radio operator Tommy Rodriguez of the Joyita managed to establish two-way communication with the lighthouse. The conversation that followed challenged everything the research team thought they understood about Bermuda Triangle phenomena. "Lighthouse Station, this is MV Joyita. We've been receiving your navigation warnings. Can you provide assistance with our position?" The response came in a voice that seemed to echo across decades. "MV Joyita. This is Temporal Lighthouse Station Echo. We have been monitoring your position across multiple time streams. You are currently sailing in temporal coordinates 1955-247.3, grid reference Bermuda 7. Navigation assistance available." The lighthouse operator spoke in terms that suggested an understanding of temporal mechanics far beyond current human knowledge. They provided navigation coordinates that included temporal positioning, a fourth-dimensional navigation system that the phantom vessels had been unconsciously using. all vessels in the Triangle Temporal Zone. The Lighthouse continued broadcasting. This is your temporal navigation beacon. We provide safe passage coordinates for all time streams. Current temporal weather conditions show moderate temporal shear in zones Alpha through Delta. Exercise caution when crossing temporal boundaries. The research team realized that the Lighthouse was serving as a temporal air traffic control center, guiding phantom vessels safely through the dangerous temporal currents of the Bermuda Triangle. But who was operating the Lighthouse? The voice was clearly human, but it demonstrated knowledge of temporal physics that wouldn't exist for decades, if ever. During one extended communication session, the Lighthouse operator provided information that shook the research team's understanding of the entire phenomenon. "This is Lighthouse Keeper Morgan." The voice identified itself. "I've been maintaining this beacon for, well, time doesn't work the same way here. I was the keeper of Fowey Rock's light when the first temporal displacement occurred in 1878. Since then, I've been guiding ships through the temporal waters." Lighthouse Keeper Morgan claimed to have been maintaining the temporal beacon for over 140 years, helping vessels navigate through time displacement events that had been occurring in the Bermuda Triangle since the late 1800s. The Triangle has been creating temporal anomalies for more than a century, Morgan explained. "I was caught in the first major displacement event, along with my Lighthouse. But instead of being trapped in a time loop like the ships, I was given responsibility. I became the keeper of temporal navigation for all the vessels that would follow." Morgan's Lighthouse existed in what he called temporal stable space, a zone that touched all time periods simultaneously, but remained anchored to its original temporal coordinates. This allowed him to communicate with and guide vessels from any era. "Every ship that's ever been lost in the Triangle passes through my beacon's range," Morgan continued. "Some are trapped in temporal loops, sailing the same routes endlessly. Others pass through and emerge in different time periods. A few, like mine, become part of the temporal infrastructure itself." The Lighthouse Keeper revealed that the Bermuda Triangle was part of a larger temporal phenomenon that affected several locations around the world. Similar temporal anomalies existed in other maritime regions, each with its own temporal lighthouse, guiding displaced vessels. "We're not alone out here," Morgan explained. "There are temporal keepers at stations around the globe, the Dragon's Triangle in the Pacific, the Vile Vortex sites, other locations where time itself has become unstable. We maintain communication with each other, sharing information about temporal weather patterns and displacement events." The research team learned that Lighthouse Keeper Morgan had been documenting temporal displacement events for over a century, maintaining logs that contained information about hundreds of ships and aircraft that had been caught in temporal anomalies. "I have records of vessels you haven't even discovered yet," Morgan told the research team. "Ships that will become displaced in the future, aircraft that will enter temporal loops decades from now. Time isn't linear in the Triangle. Past, present, and future all exist simultaneously." The temporal lighthouse had become more than just a navigation aid. It was a repository of temporal history, documenting the human cost of the Triangle's temporal anomalies while providing guidance and hope to the phantom vessels still sailing through displaced time. As the research team continued their communications with lighthouse keeper Morgan, they realized they had discovered not just a temporal phenomenon, but a temporal civilization, a community of displaced souls who had adapted to existence outside normal time and had taken on the responsibility of helping others navigate the impossible waters of the Bermuda Triangle. As the research team's understanding of the Bermuda Triangle's temporal anomalies deepened, they discovered that the displacement events weren't random. They followed patterns that lighthouse keeper Morgan called temporal weather. Just like regular weather systems, temporal disturbances move across the triangle in predictable patterns. Morgan explained during one extended communication session, there are temporal fronts, temporal storms, and periods of temporal calm. Learning to read these patterns is essential for navigation in displaced time. The Phantom vessel crews had been unconsciously documenting temporal weather for decades through their reports of strange atmospheric and oceanic conditions. The research team began analyzing these reports to create the first temporal weather maps. Captain Simpson of the Voyager provided some of the most detailed temporal weather observations. The fog has been coming and going in waves. When it's thick, we can hear voices speaking in languages that don't sound human. When it clears, the stars are in completely different positions. It's like the fog is carrying us between different versions of the night sky. Rodriguez realized that the fog Captain Simpson described was actually visible manifestation of temporal displacement. The Phantom vessels were sailing through temporal weather fronts that caused them to shift between different time periods. The temporal weather creates zones of temporal instability, she explained to the research team. During temporal storms, the boundaries between different time periods become fluid. Ships can shift from one era to another without warning. The USS Cyclops provided dramatic accounts of severe temporal weather. Captain Worley described conditions that defied normal meteorological explanation. We've encountered the strangest weather patterns, Captain Worley reported. Rain that falls upward, wind that blows from the past and future simultaneously, and electrical storms where the lightning shows glimpses of other ships from different eras. During the worst of these storms, we can see through time itself. Captain Worley's description of lightning that shows glimpses of other ships was actually temporal lightning, electrical discharges that occurred when different time periods came into close contact. These temporal lightning strikes created brief windows between eras, allowing vessels from different time periods to see each other. Lighthouse keeper Morgan explained that temporal lightning was one of the most dangerous aspects of temporal weather. When temporal lightning strikes, it can cause temporal displacement without warning. Ships can be thrown from their original time period into completely different eras. I've seen vessels from the 1800s suddenly appear in temporal zones from the 1990s. The research team documented several types of temporal weather phenomena. Temporal fog, misty conditions that caused ships to drift between time periods gradually. Vessels sailing through temporal fog often reported disorientation and gradual changes in their environment. Temporal storms, severe disturbances that could cause sudden, dramatic displacement across decades or even centuries. These storms were characterized by impossible weather conditions and reality distortions. Temporal doldrums, calm zones where time moved extremely slowly or stopped entirely. Ships caught in temporal doldrums could experience minutes that lasted for hours or days. Temporal trade winds, steady temporal currents that moved vessels consistently through time in predictable directions. Some phantom ships had learned to use these currents for controlled temporal navigation. The most dangerous phenomenon was what Morgan called temporal hurricanes. Massive disturbances that could trap multiple vessels from different eras in chaotic temporal loops. I've tracked temporal hurricanes that lasted for decades, Morgan reported. They create whirlpools in time itself, drawing in ships from multiple eras and mixing them together in temporal chaos. The vessels caught in these storms experience time in fragments, moments from different decades, spliced together randomly. A Flight 19 appeared to have been caught in a temporal hurricane at the moment of their displacement. Lieutenant Taylor's confused radio transmissions made new sense when viewed as reports from pilots flying through fragmented time. "We can't make out where we are," Taylor had radioed. "Everything looks wrong. Everything looks strange. Even the ocean." Lieutenant Taylor was seeing fragments of different time periods spliced together by the temporal hurricane, ocean conditions from various eras appearing simultaneously, creating the impossible geography he described. The research team learned that temporal weather was influenced by cosmic factors, solar activity, lunar phases, and planetary alignments all affected the stability of temporal zones. In the Bermuda Triangle, major temporal storms often coincide with solar flares or unusual planetary configurations. Dr. Chen observed after analyzing decades of phantom vessel reports. It's as if the triangle acts as a cosmic antenna, amplifying temporal disturbances caused by celestial events. Lighthouse keeper Morgan confirmed this cosmic connection. "I've been tracking the patterns for over a century. Temporal weather follows cosmic cycles, some that repeat every few years, others that take decades to complete. The most severe temporal displacement events occur during what I call temporal conjunction, when multiple cosmic factors align to create maximum instability." The phantom vessel crews had learned to recognize signs of approaching temporal weather. Captain Edgar of the SS Poet had become particularly skilled at temporal weather prediction. "The water changes color before a temporal storm," he reported. "It starts to shimmer with colors that don't exist in normal light. The fish disappear, and you can hear sounds from other time periods carried on the wind. When you see these signs, you batten down for temporal rough weather." Some phantom vessels had learned to seek shelter during severe temporal weather by positioning themselves at the boundaries between stable temporal zones. These temporal harbors provided protection from the worst displacement effects. There are safe zones where multiple time periods intersect but remain stable. Captain Santos of the El Dorado explained, "We've learned to anchor in these areas during temporal storms. It's like finding a calm bay during a regular hurricane." The research team realized that understanding temporal weather was crucial not just for studying the phantom vessels, but for preventing future displacement events. By learning to predict temporal storms, they might be able to warn modern ships and aircraft away from dangerous temporal zones. we're developing the first temporal weather forecasting system. Dr. Rodriguez announced after months of analysis. If we can predict when and where temporal storms will occur, we can prevent more vessels from becoming trapped in displacement loops. But temporal weather prediction required understanding cosmic and quantum forces that were at the very edge of human scientific knowledge. The Phantom vessels and Lighthouse keeper Morgan had become humanity's first temporal meteorologists, developing practical knowledge of forces that conventional science could barely comprehend. As the research team's understanding of the Phantom vessel phenomenon grew, they faced an inevitable question. Could the displaced ships and their crews be rescued and returned to the present day? The first rescue attempt was planned around the MV Joyita, whose crew had maintained the most consistent communication with the research team. Dr. Rodriguez and her team developed a theoretical approach they called temporal anchoring, using synchronized electromagnetic pulses to create a bridge between the Joyita's temporal zone and the present day. The theory is sound, Dr. Chen explained as the rescue mission was prepared. If we can generate precisely calibrated electromagnetic fields at the boundary between temporal zones, we should be able to create a stable corridor that allows the Joyita to transition back to our time period. The rescue attempt required unprecedented coordination between multiple research vessels, Coast Guard cutters, and specially modified aircraft equipped with experimental temporal field generators. Lighthouse keeper Morgan provided crucial assistance with the rescue attempt. I can guide the Joyita to the optimal coordinates for temporal transition. There's a zone about 12 miles southeast of my lighthouse where the temporal barriers are naturally thin. If your equipment can stabilize the barrier, the ship should be able to cross over. On the morning of the rescue attempt, Captain Simpson of the Joyita reported that his crew was ready. Why understand? This might be our only chance to return home. The strange thing is, some of my crew members aren't sure they want to leave. They've adapted to life in temporal displacement. The idea of returning to a world that's aged 70 years while they remained young is frightening. This psychological aspect of temporal rescue hadn't been fully considered. The Phantom vessel crews faced the prospect of returning to a world where their families had aged and died, where their former lives no longer existed, where they would be anachronisms from the past. Tommy Rodriguez, the young radio operator from the Joyita, expressed the dilemma during pre-rescue communications. If I return to 2024, everyone I knew in 1955 will be gone. I'll be a 23-year-old man in a world that's moved on without me. Maybe it's better to stay here, where at least I understand the rules, even if they're impossible rules. Despite these psychological concerns, the rescue attempt proceeded. The research team's vessels positioned themselves at precise coordinates around the temporal zone boundary, ready to activate their electromagnetic field generators. All stations, this is control. Dr. Rodriguez broadcast as the operation began. Initiate temporal field generation on my mark. 3, 2, 2, 1, mark. The electromagnetic field generators activated simultaneously, creating what the team hoped would be a stable bridge between temporal zones. For the first few minutes, everything appeared to be working. I can see your ships! Captain Simpson reported excitedly. The fog is clearing, and I can see vessels that look like they're from the future. The water is changing color. It's becoming the normal blue of the Caribbean instead of the silver we've been sailing through. But as the Joyita began to approach the temporal boundary, the electromagnetic fields began to destabilize. The massive energy requirements were beyond the capacity of the research team's equipment. Field generators are overloading, reported the chief engineer aboard the research vessel Temporal Explorer. We're drawing more power than the systems can handle. If we continue, we'll lose all our equipment. Dr. Rodriguez faced an agonizing choice: risk the lives of her research team and the loss of all their equipment, or abort the rescue attempt and leave the Joyita trapped in temporal displacement. Abort the rescue, she ordered reluctantly. All stations, shut down field generators immediately. As the electromagnetic fields collapsed, the Joyita began to fade from radar and visual contact, returning to its temporal zone. "We're losing sight of your ships," Captain Simpson reported, his voice heavy with disappointment. "The fog is returning, and the water is turning silver again. I understand why you had to stop. Maybe we're not meant to return home." The failed rescue attempt provided valuable data about the enormous energy requirements for temporal extraction. The research team realized that rescuing phantom vessels would require technology far beyond current capabilities. But Lighthouse Keeper Morgan offered an alternative perspective. Perhaps rescue isn't about bringing the ships back to your time. Perhaps it's about helping them find peace in their own temporal space. Morgan explained that some phantom vessels had found ways to break out of their temporal loops without returning to the present. They had learned to navigate freely through temporal zones, effectively becoming time travelers who could visit any era. The key is accepting temporal displacement rather than fighting it, Morgan explained. Ships that resist their situation remain trapped in loops, endlessly repeating their final voyage. But those that embrace their temporal nature can learn to navigate freely through time itself. Several phantom vessels had reportedly achieved this temporal freedom. The luxury yacht Rivonok had learned to visit different time periods, allowing its passengers to experience history firsthand. The crew had adapted to become temporal tourists, exploring the past and future while maintaining their home base in their original displacement zone. We've learned to sail through time, like other ships sail through water, reported Captain Henderson of the Rivonok during one communication session. Last week, we visited the Caribbean during the golden age of piracy. Next week, we're planning to sail forward to see what the ocean looks like in the 22nd century. This form of temporal rescue offered hope for the phantom vessel crews. Rather than being trapped victims of displacement, they could become explorers of the fourth dimension, using their unique situation to experience history and the future in ways no other humans could. The research team began developing new rescue protocols based on teaching temporal navigation rather than attempting temporal extraction. Working with Lighthouse Keeper Morgan, they created training programs to help phantom vessel crews master temporal navigation techniques. We're not trying to rescue them from temporal displacement anymore, Dr. Rodriguez explained to her team. We're trying to rescue them from temporal imprisonment. The goal is to give them the knowledge and skill to navigate freely through time while maintaining contact with the present day. This new approach to rescue work transformed the relationship between the research team and the phantom vessels. Instead of being victims to be saved, the displaced crews became partners in exploring the possibilities of temporal navigation. The phantom vessels were no longer lost ships, sailing endlessly through time. They were becoming humanity's first temporal explorers, mapping the fourth dimension and discovering the possibilities that existed beyond normal linear time. As months turned into years of communication with the phantom vessels, the research team witnessed the evolution of something unprecedented in human history, a community that existed across multiple time periods simultaneously. The phantom vessels had gradually organized themselves into what Lighthouse keeper Morgan called the Time Fleet, a loose confederation of ships from different eras that learned to coordinate their temporal navigation and support each other across the boundaries of time. "We've established regular meeting coordinates," reported Captain Simpson of the Joyita during one communication session. "The first Sunday of every month. Though month means something different for each of us. We gather at the temporal convergence point near Morgan's Lighthouse. Ships from 1918 through 2019 all come together. These temporal gatherings had become remarkable social events where crews from different eras shared knowledge, stories, and resources. The USS Cyclops from 1918 would sail alongside modern cargo vessels from the 1980s, their crews exchanging information about navigation techniques, maritime technology, and life in their respective time periods. Dr. Rodriguez's team was invited to observe one of these gatherings through extended radio communication. The event provided unprecedented insights into how human society adapted to existence across multiple time periods. "This is Captain Worley of the USS Cyclops," came the formal naval communication. "Time Fleet Assembly is now in session. All vessels report status and position. One by one, ships from across 8 decades checked in. Marine Sulphur Queen, 1963, all hands well, cargo secure. SS Poet 1980, position stable, temporal weather calm in our zone. MV Joyita 1955, crew ready for assignment. Navigation systems optimal. Flight 19th 1945, formation intact, fuel. Well, fuel doesn't seem to be an issue anymore." The Time Fleet had developed its own protocols, ranks, and social structure that transcended the original military or civilian nature of the individual vessels. Lighthouse keeper Morgan served as the unofficial admiral of the fleet, while individual ships specialized in different aspects of temporal navigation and support. "We've learned that different ships have different temporal capabilities," Captain Edgar of the SS Poet explained. "Military vessels, like the Cyclops, can navigate through rough temporal weather better than civilian ships. But passenger vessels like the Ravonic are better at detecting temporal convergence points where different eras intersect." The Time Fleet had established specialized roles for its members. The USS Cyclops served as the fleet's heavy-duty temporal tugboat, able to assist smaller vessels that became caught in dangerous temporal currents. The Marine Sulphur Queen had become a temporal cargo vessel, somehow able to transport information and even small objects between different time periods. Flight 19 served as the fleet's reconnaissance squadron, using their aircraft to scout temporal weather patterns and locate vessels that had become lost in temporal storms. The luxury yacht Rivonok had become the fleet's diplomatic vessel, specializing in first contact with newly displaced ships and helping their crews adapt to temporal existence. Every new ship that enters the Triangle gets a visit from the Rivonok, reported Captain Henderson. Why help them understand what's happened to them, teach them basic temporal navigation, and introduce them to the fleet community. It's frightening enough to be displaced in time. No one should have to face it alone. The Time Fleet had also developed remarkable innovations in temporal technology. Working together, crews from different eras had combined their knowledge to create solutions that no single time period could have achieved alone. The 1980s ships understand electronics better than we do, reported Captain Worley of the World War I era Cyclops. But we understand steam power and mechanical systems better than they do. By combining our knowledge, we've created hybrid propulsion systems that work reliably in temporal conditions. The fleet had learned to modify their vessels using techniques that combined technologies from multiple eras. Ships from the 1940s had upgraded their radio systems using electronics principles learned from 1980s vessels. Modern ships had improved their reliability by incorporating robust mechanical backup systems designed by World War I naval engineers. Perhaps most remarkably, the Time Fleet had developed its own economy based on the exchange of knowledge, skills, and temporal services rather than traditional currency. Currency doesn't mean much when you're from different decades, Captain Santos of the El Dorado explained. But knowledge is always valuable. A navigation technique from 1918 might solve a problem that a 1980s ship is having. A weather prediction method from the 1950s might help a modern vessel avoid temporal storms. The fleet had also established what they called temporal mail service, a system for transmitting messages between different time periods. Using the Marine Sulphur Queen's unique cargo capabilities, they could send letters and information to specific temporal coordinates. We've delivered messages from 1980s crews to their families in the 1950s, reported Captain Fanning of the Marine Sulphur Queen. We can't change the past, but we can provide closure for families who wondered what happened to their loved ones. This temporal mail service had created profound emotional connections across time. Families separated by temporal displacement could maintain contact across decades, sharing their experiences and supporting each other despite being trapped in different time periods. The Time Fleet had also taken on the responsibility of temporal search and rescue. When new vessels became displaced in the Triangle, fleet members would coordinate to locate them and provide assistance. Last month, we helped a fishing boat from 1987 that had become caught in a temporal loop near the edge of Zone Delta, reported Tommy Rodriguez of the Joy Eater. They were repeating the same day over and over, completely confused about what was happening. The Rivonok made contact and guided them to stable temporal waters. The research team realized they were witnessing the birth of a new form of human civilization, one that existed outside normal temporal constraints and had developed unique solutions to the challenges of multi-dimensional existence. The Time Fleet represents something completely unprecedented, Dr. Rodriguez observed during a team meeting. They're not just surviving temporal displacement, they're thriving. They've created a society that functions across multiple time periods simultaneously. the Time Fleet had become more than a collection of displaced vessels. They had evolved into humanity's first temporal civilization, proving that human adaptability and community could overcome even the impossible challenge of existence across multiple time periods. As the research team continued their observations, they realized that the Time Fleet might represent the future of human development, a preview of how humanity might eventually learn to navigate the fourth dimension as easily as ships navigate the ocean. The most startling development in the Time Fleet phenomenon came when the research team began receiving communications from vessels that appeared to be from the future. Ships that wouldn't be built for decades, but which had somehow become displaced backward through time into the Bermuda Triangle's temporal zones. The first contact came on a frequency that wasn't being monitored by any of the phantom vessels from the past. Chief Radio Operator Sullivan picked up the transmission during a routine sweep of communication bands. This is the CNV Temporal Navigator, calling any station in the 2024 time stream. We are currently positioned in temporal coordinates future 7, experiencing normal displacement conditions. Request communication with contemporary vessels for temporal orientation. The technology described in the transmission was unlike anything in current maritime engineering. The CNV Temporal Navigator claimed to be a purpose-built temporal exploration vessel from the year 2087, equipped with what they called chronon drives and temporal positioning systems. We are part of the future fleet, the vessel's communication officer explained during extended contact. In our timeline, temporal displacement became a known phenomenon around 2031. By 2050, we had developed technology specifically designed for temporal navigation. The Temporal Navigator is a research vessel sent back to study the origins of the temporal anomalies. Data. Rodriguez's team was initially skeptical, but the technical information provided by the future fleet vessels was consistently accurate and demonstrated understanding of temporal physics that wouldn't be developed for decades. They're describing theoretical concepts that our most advanced physicists are just beginning to explore. Dr. Chen reported after analyzing the transmissions. Either this is an incredibly sophisticated hoax, or we're really in communication with ships from the future. The future fleet vessels reported that temporal displacement had become a regular occurrence throughout the 21st century, with temporal anomalies appearing in oceans around the world. Humanity had eventually learned to navigate these anomalies safely and had developed an entire temporal transportation network. In our time, the Bermuda Triangle is a major hub in the global temporal transportation system. Reported Captain Elena Vasquez of the Temporal Navigator will have temporal ports where ships can enter specific time periods for research, commerce, or exploration. The triangle that was once feared has become humanity's gateway to temporal travel. The future fleet had been sent back to the early 21st century to study the primitive conditions that existed before temporal navigation became routine. But several of their vessels had become displaced even further back in time, joining the community of phantom ships from various eras. We were prepared for temporal displacement, Captain Vasquez explained. But we weren't prepared for the complexity of the multi-era community that exists here. The time fleet that you've been studying becomes the foundation for all future temporal navigation development. The future fleet vessels brought disturbing news about humanity's temporal future. They reported that temporal displacement events had increased dramatically throughout the 21st century, affecting millions of people worldwide. The temporal anomalies aren't natural phenomena, revealed Dr. Sarah Park of the research vessel Kronos Explorer from 2078. They're side effects of humanity's development of temporal technology. Every time we manipulate time for research or transportation, we create ripples that cause displacement events in the past. This revelation meant that the phantom vessels in the Bermuda Triangle were victims of temporal experiments that hadn't even been conducted yet. The Time Fleet was caught in a temporal paradox, displaced by technology that would be developed partly based on the study of their own displacement. We're caught in a temporal causality loop, Dr. Rodriguez realized. The phantom vessels exist because of future temporal technology, but that technology is being developed by studying the phantom vessels. Effect is preceding cause. The future fleet also brought warnings about temporal storms that would affect Earth's timeline throughout the 21st century. According to their records, several major temporal displacement events were still to come. The Great Displacement of 2045 will affect every ocean on Earth, reported Captain James Wilson of the temporal research vessel Time Horizon from 2089. Millions of vessels will be caught in temporal loops simultaneously. The experience we gain from the current time fleet will be crucial for managing that crisis. But the future fleet also brought hope. They reported that humanity eventually learned to rescue most displaced vessels and developed technology that could prevent temporal displacement for those who chose not to travel through time. The research you're conducting now becomes the foundation for the Temporal Rescue Service established in 2052. Captain Vasquez explained. Every phantom vessel crew that you're studying now is eventually reunited with their families, either through temporal extraction or by bringing their families into the temporal community. The future fleet had also developed solutions to the psychological challenges of temporal displacement. They had created temporal therapy, techniques that helped displaced individuals adapt to existence across multiple time periods without losing their mental stability. We've learned that consciousness is naturally temporal, reported Dr. Lisa Martinez, a temporal psychologist from the research vessel Mind Bridge from 2095. Human awareness isn't limited to linear time. We just think it is because of our cultural conditioning. Once people learn to embrace their temporal nature, they can navigate time as easily as they navigate space. The future fleet vessels served as temporal diplomats, facilitating communication between the different eras represented in the time fleet. They had developed translation technologies that could convert concepts and ideas between different temporal periods. Communication across time periods is more complex than language translation, explained communications officer Tom Chen of the Temporal Navigator. Different eras have different conceptual frameworks, different ways of understanding reality. Our temporal translation systems help crews from different centuries communicate effectively. The future fleet also provided glimpses of humanity's ultimate temporal destiny. According to their reports, humans eventually evolved beyond the need for physical vessels, becoming beings of pure consciousness that could navigate time directly. The Time Fleet is just the beginning, Captain Vasquez revealed during one extended communication session. Eventually, humans learn to exist as temporal consciousness, able to experience any time period directly without needing ships or technology. The Phantom vessels are humanity's first step toward becoming a truly temporal species. As the research team absorbed these revelations from the future fleet, they realized that their study of the Phantom vessels had evolved far beyond maritime archaeology. They were witnessing humanity's first steps toward mastering the fourth dimension and becoming a temporal civilization that could exist across all of time simultaneously. The Bermuda Triangle had revealed itself not as a mysterious anomaly, but as a preview of humanity's temporal future, a future where time itself would become navigable, and where the barriers between past, present, and future would dissolve entirely. 3 years had passed since the research team first made contact with the Phantom vessels of the Bermuda Triangle. What had begun as an investigation into radar anomalies had evolved into humanity's first glimpse of its temporal destiny. Dr. Rodriguez stood on the deck of the research vessel Temporal Explorer, watching the sunset paint the waters of the triangle in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to shimmer with temporal energy. Around her, the most sophisticated temporal monitoring equipment ever assembled continued its eternal vigil, tracking the movements of ships and aircraft that existed across multiple centuries simultaneously. The Time Fleet had grown to include over 200 vessels from across more than a century of maritime history. Ships from the age of sail worked alongside nuclear-powered submarines from the Cold War era. World War II aircraft flew in formation with commercial jets from the 1980s, and guiding them all were the future fleet vessels, bringing wisdom from decades that hadn't yet occurred. Status report from all temporal zones. Came the familiar voice of Lighthouse Keeper Morgan, still maintaining his beacon after more than 140 years of temporal guardianship. One by one, the Phantom vessels checked in, their voices creating a chorus that spanned centuries. USS Cyclops, 1918, all hands accounted for. Temporal navigation systems optimal. Marine Sulphur Queen, 1963, continuing mail service between temporal zones, all deliveries on schedule. Flight 19th, 1945, reconnaissance complete, temporal weather clear in all sectors. Temporal Navigator, 2087, research operations proceeding, timeline analysis complete. The Phantom vessels had long since stopped being lost ships. They had become humanity's first temporal explorers, mapping the fourth dimension and developing the knowledge that would eventually allow all of humanity to transcend the limitations of linear time. Dr. Rodriguez reflected on the transformations she had witnessed. The frightened, confused crews who had first been contacted 3 years ago had evolved into confident temporal navigators. They had learned to sail through time itself, visiting any era they chose while maintaining their community bonds across all periods. "We've discovered something remarkable," she recorded in her final research log. The Phantom vessels weren't trapped by temporal displacement. They were liberated by it. They've become free to explore the entire timeline of human history, unbound by the linear progression that limits the rest of us. The Time Fleet had established permanent settlements at temporal convergence points throughout the triangle. These temporal cities existed in multiple time periods simultaneously, serving as meeting places where beings from any era could interact and share knowledge. New Athens, built around Lighthouse Keeper Morgan's beacon, had become the capital of temporal civilization. Its crystalline spires rose through multiple time periods, visible to ships from any era that entered the triangle. The city served as an embassy between temporal humanity and linear humanity, facilitating communication and knowledge exchange. New Athens has become more than just a settlement, reported Captain Simpson of the Joy Eater, who had been elected as the city's first temporal mayor. It's become a university where humans can learn to transcend their temporal limitations. We're teaching courses in fourth, dimensional navigation, temporal philosophy, and multi-era communication. The research team had established permanent liaison positions in New Athens, serving as ambassadors between the temporal community and the linear world. Dr. Chen had volunteered to undergo temporal enhancement, becoming one of the first humans to exist simultaneously in multiple time periods. The experience is indescribable. Dr. Chen reported from his position in temporal space. I can perceive the entire timeline of the triangle simultaneously. I can see the first temporal displacement event in 1878, the current time fleet operations, and the future development of temporal civilization, all as a single, continuous experience. Through Dr. Chen's temporal perception, the research team learned that the Bermuda Triangle was just one node in a vast network of temporal anomalies that would eventually span the globe. Other triangles would manifest in the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and the Arctic, each serving as a gateway to different aspects of temporal existence. Humanity is approaching a temporal awakening. Dr. Chen transmitted from his enhanced perspective. The phantom vessels are just the beginning. Eventually, all humans will have the choice between linear existence and temporal consciousness. Those who choose temporal awareness will join the time fleet and explore the infinite possibilities of existence across all time. The future fleet had provided detailed timelines of humanity's temporal evolution. By 2030, temporal displacement would become common enough that governments would establish temporal rescue services. By 2040, the first voluntary temporal colonies would be established. By 2050, temporal tourism would allow people to visit any period in history. But the ultimate goal, according to the future fleet, was the Great Convergence, a time when the barriers between all temporal periods would dissolve, allowing humanity to exist as a single, unified consciousness spanning all of time simultaneously. The Great Convergence is scheduled for 2157, reported Captain Vasquez of the Temporal Navigator. On that date, linear time will end for humanity. All humans who have ever lived will be reunited in temporal consciousness, creating a single, eternal human community that encompasses every moment of human existence. As Dr. Rodriguez watched the temporal lights dancing across the triangle waters, she realized that her team had witnessed the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure. The phantom vessels had shown that death itself was just another form of temporal displacement. That consciousness could continue beyond physical existence, exploring infinite possibilities across all time. We've learned that the universe is far more vast and wonderful than we ever imagined, she recorded in her final log entry. Time isn't a river flowing in one direction. It's an ocean that can be navigated in any direction. The phantom vessels have become our guides to this temporal ocean, showing us that existence itself is an eternal voyage with no beginning and no end. The Time Fleet continued its eternal operations, welcoming new vessels from the past and future, while maintaining their community across all temporal zones. They had become more than ships. They had become humanity's first citizens of eternity, proving that consciousness could transcend any limitation, even time itself. As night fell over the Bermuda Triangle, the temporal lights grew brighter, forming patterns that could be seen from space. These lights were signals from the Time Fleet, beacons calling to the rest of humanity to join them in their eternal voyage, beyond the boundaries of linear time. The phantom vessels had shown that getting lost could sometimes be the first step toward finding something infinitely greater. They had been displaced from their original destinations, but they had found their way to a destination beyond imagination, eternal existence in the infinite ocean of time itself. In the deep waters of the Triangle, where time itself had become navigable, the greatest voyage in human history continued. Ships that had been declared lost forever had found their way to forever itself, sailing eternal seas under stars that shone from every era simultaneously. The mystery of the Bermuda Triangle had been solved, but the solution was far more wonderful than anyone had ever imagined. It wasn't a place where ships disappeared. It was a place where they were transformed, becoming part of humanity's temporal future and proving that some voyages never end, because they lead to destinations beyond time itself. As you drift into sleep tonight, perhaps you too can hear the voices from the Time Fleet calling across the waters of time itself. In your dreams, you might find yourself aboard one of those phantom vessels, sailing through the eternal ocean where past, present, and future merge into the infinite voyage of consciousness itself. The ships are still sailing, the crews are still exploring, and the eternal voyage continues. In the deep waters of time, where mystery becomes truth and impossibility becomes reality, the greatest adventure of all of Asia Earth, of all waits those brave enough to set sail beyond the horizon of the known into the infinite ocean of temporal possibility. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the waters of time, ships are still sailing toward destinations beyond imagination, and that the greatest voyages are those that never end, because they lead to the eternal shores of infinite possibility. As our remarkable voyage through the temporal waters of the Bermuda Triangle comes to an end, we return to the shores of linear time, carrying profound questions about the nature of existence, consciousness, and the infinite possibilities that await beyond the boundaries of ordinary experience. The discovery of the Time Fleet reminds us that some journeys never truly end. They simply transform into adventures beyond our current imagination. The phantom vessels sailing through temporal waters show us that consciousness itself is the greatest explorer, capable of navigating not just the seven seas, but the infinite ocean of time itself. If these maritime mysteries and temporal adventures help guide you into peaceful sleep and inspire your own inner voyages beyond the ordinary, consider joining our crew of fellow ocean explorers. Subscribe and ring that notification bell to sail with us as we continue discovering the profound mysteries that exist in the deep waters of both ocean and time. Together, we'll keep exploring the infinite possibilities that await those brave enough to set sail beyond the horizon of the known into the eternal waters of mystery and wonder. Sweet dreams, fellow time sailor. May your rest be filled with visions of phantom ships sailing through temporal mists, and may you awaken with deeper understanding of the infinite voyages that await consciousness willing to explore beyond the boundaries of linear time. Until our next voyage through the impossible waters, where mystery becomes reality and time itself becomes navigable. Sleep well and sail on.